Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Happy New Year to you all. And it's the big stories of the year with our team of journalists. Back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, it was quite a year in Pennsylvania politics and Pennsylvania government. Here to analyze the year in review is a team of journalists, starting with Amy Worden with the Philadelphia Inquirer and John Micek with the Allentown Call. Journalists, both of you both write. One for Philadelphia Inquirer, one for the Allentown Call. You even do a blog, right? Indeed. I'm always putting a blog in. Now, you're not blogging yet, right?
No, occasional blog.
Occasional blogger, okay. And to my right over here, Brad Bumsted, you're left out there of the Pittsburgh Tribune. You do columns. I read your columns all the time.
But hopefully never a blog.
Never a blog. All right, we won't get you started on that. But look, we hope you have a great new year out there. We want to take a look at last year, the Pennsylvania legislature, what happened with Governor Rendell, sort of the big stories. Brad Bumsted, I'll start with you. Big story of the year in the top 5 on anybody's list has to be the now infamous bonus gate.
No question about it, Terry.
Explain for our viewers bonus gate.
It's #1 at the Capitol. What it's about is an investigation of whether bonuses, state-paid bonuses, were given to legislative staffers in return for political work. This all came about last January when the Harrisburg Patriot published a memo that House Majority Leader Bill DeWeese had sent out to staffers, saying, referring to the bonuses and saying, don't tell anyone about it. Then each of the 4 caucuses did mea culpas, and they came out with the amount that they'd given in bonuses. Totals about $3.6 million. The Attorney General, Tom Corbett, is investigating this. So far, we've seen an offshoot of this, a former state Democratic House member, Frank LaGrotta, accused of 2 felony counts of conflict of interest, and 7 staffers of the Democratic caucus have been fired.
And this goes on. This investigation continues to go on, right?
It does, and it has the potential to really alter the political landscape in 2008.
Yeah, I want to ask Amy, this had an effect how internally. Now, you're there every day. You're following the activities of the legislature. Some folks said that this put particularly the House, on the House side, in the Democratic caucus, the whole, a major state of confusion within the ranks of the Democrats in how the legislature functioned, particularly this fall.
Well, a lot of major questions have been raised about the leadership of House Majority Leader Bill DeWeese as a result of this, because he's having to deal with a major investigation of his staff and the operations of the caucus, at the same time dealing with a very disparate and very slim Democratic majority in the House. So he's had a
juggling a bunch of balls.
It.
John, we're going to talk a little bit about what didn't get done, but obviously there's a relationship between what Governor Rendell and his very ambitious agenda and sort of what we could call the chaos. And is that too strong a word?
No, I mean,
use chaos in the legislature?
I really don't think it is. There were any number of major second-term initiatives that Governor Rendell proposed beginning of 2007, healthcare, alternative energy, a bunch of different things. Bits and scads of that have been done, but in terms of actual real stuff getting through, that hasn't happened yet. And that's because he depended on the Democrats in the House to sort of carry his water for him. But they're in such disarray that they were so distracted that they took their eye off the ball. A lot of that stuff just didn't move.
Yeah. Now, Brad, or anyone who wants to get in on this, I mean, the Attorney General still has this investigation on. In the last couple of weeks, some additional folks were called, according to press reports, to the grand jury. Does anyone, do you all expect this issue is going to carry over into the new year?
Oh, sure. They're just getting started. I mean, if you look at where they're headed with this, and you can only surmise that based on who's been called, because we don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but they have now started to subpoena former staffers of Mike Vion, who'd been the House Majority, actually the House Minority Whip, and is now a lobbyist in Harrisburg. He's not been accused of any wrongdoing at this point, but clearly they're investigating Vion in terms of that and also the Beaver Initiative for Growth.
Now, Amy, the Majority Leader, Bill DeWeese, has been on this offensive to sort of what he would call clean up the problem. He actually has been going to editorial boards. I know he went to Allentown Call, Bordery, last week. Amy, he's been to your editorial board. What's the thrust of sort of the defense that the majority leader is using?
Well, he says, I didn't know.
I didn't know.
That I delegated these responsibilities to talented staffers at lower levels and let them handle it. And I think that raises a lot of interesting questions about his leadership. He's the buck stops here,
right,
sort of thing. He's at the top of the pecking order, and yet he says he didn't know what was going on at the lower levels.
All right, before we go on break, and I want to come back, we'll take issue number 2. But is there a consensus here that this is certainly, if not the top story, one of the top stories in the state last year? You all agree with that?
The top story.
The top story. You agree?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Consensus. And it has influenced the entire legislative process in terms of the substance of what the legislature does.
No question about it.
You all agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, we come back. Story number 2, roads, bridges, and mass transit. A big plus for the governor and the legislature. We'll find out after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society, doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and again, Happy New Year. This is our Year in Review show with Amy Worden, Brad Bumsted, John Micek, journalists all. We're chatting about the big stories of the past year. We go from Bonus Gate to roads, bridges, and mass transit. The governor came forward last spring and said the state needs, based on an independent report, $1.7 billion a year to deal with the roads and bridges in our state and have to help out the city's mass transit problems. John Micek, what happened there?
It's like a road. It's actually like a Roadrunner cartoon where the coyote is zipping down the highway, bliss-free, and then all of a sudden hits a brick wall. I mean, that's really what it reminds me of.
All right, he's running brisk-free. What's that part of it?
Well, I mean, they were looking for almost $1 billion in state highway funding this year. Initially, Governor Rendell floated a plan to lease the Pennsylvania Turnpike. That went down like a stone. There's no interest at all. Tail end of the summer session, Senator Fumo from Philadelphia pops up and says, hey, we got that big honking highway, I-80, runs through the north of the state, no one there except moose and elk. Why don't we toll it? Sure enough, they get the legislation through. Seems like it's going to be a no-brainer. They can toll it and use some borrowing to raise the billion or so they need for highway transit, highway and mass transit bailout. Whereupon two congressmen from northwestern Pennsylvania, John Peterson from Venango and Phil English from Erie, pop up their heads and say, wait, this is awful.
And where were they during the debate for 8 weeks?
Exactly. No, I was going to say that's...
The thing of it is, I think they discovered a great issue. They pop up their heads and say, wait a minute, this stinks. They start trying to throw up federal roadblocks, and all of a sudden the whole thing begins to unravel.
And there's still some federal roadblocks here, even as we sit here today. Go ahead, Aim.
Right. Well, the feds have now kicked back the tolling proposal to the State Department of Transportation, saying that there's all kinds of missing pieces, that they have to fill in the blanks and come back with a better proposal. That's given more steam to the anti-toll forces who are saying, see, even the feds say this is a really bad idea.
It has, but both sides have been spinning that sending the paperwork back. And the other side of that story is that the Turnpike folks and others would say this was expected. I mean, as part of a process, you're going to have more questions come back to you, and there's nothing unusual about it. But the anti-I-80 people were saying, this is a big defeat, a big setback, it may never go through.
What gives that argument from the Turnpike Commission a little bit more credence is the Federal Highway Administration itself had said that this is a standard part of the process. But the anti-folks are arguing, well, if they had, why didn't they have these questions answered in the first place?
Yeah. Now, go ahead.
Well, so then Rendell said, well, okay, fine. I'm going to reopen the whole Turnpike lease proposal again. That there's a lot of interest out there.
Hold it, Amy. But when that was introduced into the legislature, it was a big thud, right? I mean, where was the support for that? Did anyone?
And where was the support among Republicans who would typically support that kind of privatization? They weren't there at all. But now all of a sudden, gradually, they're starting to come out a little bit and say, hey, well, maybe this isn't such a bad idea, because they see the amount of money it could bring, and they're opposed to I-80 tolling.
Yeah. So at this point, then, let me see if we can bring this to some conclusion. We do have the legislature does have a plan in place, signed into law by the governor, toll Route 80, and increase the turnpike fees by 25%, and they moved the date up to, what, 2009? So they're doing that a little. That's the current plan, right?
Which they can't do. They could declare Thursday, Friday, but they still need federal approval to do it.
I understand, but that's the current plan.
That's the current plan, right.
So governor is back with, let's lease the turnpike as his option, but there's still a little growing support. But boy, that's a mammoth undertaking, right? Does anybody think that can be done easily? Lease it? I mean, the amount of money.
I don't know. All the proposals are already out there. Yeah. I mean, I think they've got the material that they need to evaluate the proposals from these companies that are interested, and there were what, 10 or 12 of them.
Yeah, and it's not without precedent. This is something that other states have undertaken: Chicago, Indiana, New Jersey.
This would be the biggest leasing of any public road, I think, in the country.
Then we might be competing with New Jersey, though, who's looking at leasing out the Turnpike and the Garden State Parkways.
Yeah. But ultimately, money talks. And if you're coming in and you're talking 10, 20, 25, $30 billion for this road, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be hard-pressed to turn that down.
The same interest groups who were opposed to the tolling of I-80 are opposed to the privatization of the turnpike, which is namely truckers.
But there is a consensus on the road problem. Everybody agrees. It's the transit part of it that's been controversial.
That makes everyone go
And I'm
bananas.
looking at Amy because she writes for the Philadelphia newspaper, where there seems to be more controversy over reform of the mass transit agencies that some people think are inefficient. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, like lots of issues that divide the state, city or Philadelphia and everywhere else,
and
pretty
everywhere
much.
Else. Anything else?
That's it.
All right, that's it. When we come back, issue number 3. We'll hold this one in suspense. We'll see you in a moment. Issue number 3. After these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program for our year-in review with 3 of the state's leading journalists. We're chatting about the big stories of last year. Amy Worden, the governor, came forward in February with his second-term agenda. Boy, it was hugely ambitious. This time it appeared to me, and you tell me, that much of what the governor wanted did not get done. So big story number 3 is not something that happened, but maybe something that did not happen.
Right,
take it from there.
Well, the governor finishes the year with not much in his done basket, I have to say, considering he had some pretty big proposals out there back in February. Topping that was an increase in the sales tax to fund property tax rebates for people. Well, that was clearly dead on arrival, so that went no further than the budget address itself. But he also laid out, big proposals in other areas. An energy independence strategy that would promote conservation and increased use of alternative fuels. He had a health care proposal that was huge in its scope. Everything from trying to cover more Pennsylvanians, provide more Pennsylvanians with health insurance, to a smoking ban across the state. And so those were probably the key things. Now, I mean, the governor would probably say in his defense that this was these were proposals for his second term.
Well, that's not what he said when he made the announcement. He said, now, you would expect him to say, he didn't want to let him off the hook and say, well, you can do it in my 4th year. Go ahead.
Well, no, these are the kind of things you have to put some immediacy to them, and that's why even, in connection with passing a budget by June the 30th, the governor was demanding that health care and that at first, at least, and then alternative energy in particular, needed to be done right then. They came up with a deal that basically said, well, we'll have a special session on this in the fall, and we'll look at a smaller fund to do this. And they did, in fact, call a special session, but nothing got done.
Yeah.
All right, John, one of the things that the governor proposed, even in his report, he became a reformer, talked about all sorts of reforms, things that I don't think anybody expects the legislature to do, like term limits and reducing the size of the legislature. He actually at one point said he wished they'd work full-time. during the spring when he was in one of those disputes with them. But talk a little bit about the reform agenda. Another story, what did not get done?
Yeah, and this is sort of the great irony of 2007 is that all the stuff that didn't get done is happening in this alleged year of reform where the legislature was going to change its ways and become more productive and be a bright beacon for the Commonwealth. The House and Senate enacted internal rules changes that slowed down what often was sort of a runaway train legislative process where bills were rammed through committee at the last moment. They were gutted and changed to they'd go from one thing to another in a matter of a couple of days.
Now, I want to stop you there because this is important, I think, to a lot of folks about, look, you're on the front line. You have to get the information to us. We don't have any other way. You cover it. Amy, let me ask you this. Has these rules, even though it may make it more difficult, has this helped you get information to the citizens of the state, obviously through the Philly Inquirer? Has this helped you do your job? The rules changes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's so much more available now to us, for instance, online data.
Right.
When you're talking about expenses, when you're talking about even things like roll calls,
right,
which were not available instantaneously, online. I mean, not just to help us as reporters, we can physically go and get that information, but for readers.
I bring this up because, through the year, there's been lots of shots taken at the legislature for the failure to do, ethics reform, gifts, still, campaign finance reform.
All of which remains undone.
All of which remains undone. But at least on that, do you agree with Amy that now your job as a reporter is easier because of more access and more time to do it?
Only to a limited degree. I don't totally agree with Amy. I think it's better.
It's better.
But it's a minimal improvement, and it's so far removed from what they really need to do to get transparency and openness in government, that it's just a tiny first step.
Okay.
Better than nothing, but tiny.
Big story number 4 coming up after these words. We'll be back. Stay with us.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program Year in Review. Okay, topic number 4, what did get done? Now, I know you may think this will be a short segment. John Micek, what did the legislature do?
I mean, there was some stuff done. Governor Rendell did get bits and pieces, as we said earlier, of his health care reform bill through the so-called scope of practice increases for nurses and other health practitioners that would authorize them to do more and to set up these little clinics to deflect traffic away from very crowded hospital emergency rooms. They did this other thing called health care acquired or hospital acquired infections, which are these sort of secondary infections you can pick up while you're in hospital getting treated for something else. There's money allocated there to help reduce those, which is supposed to drive down health care costs as well. So, I mean, Governor Rendell points to those and lawmakers point to those as 2 pretty decent pieces of the health care agenda that got through.
And they did something, Amy, with just at the end of the year with the hazardous cleanup that was pretty important. They were going to lay off a bunch of workers. Go ahead. What was that story about?
Right. Well, how to fund the hazardous waste cleanup fund, which was going to be bankrupt at the end of the year. A matter of great dispute about where to get that money. Finally, they did reach an agreement on that.
Using their caucus funds, the internal funds of the legislature.
Exactly. And so we have a kind of a super strong Band-Aid, at least not to carry them through to 2011.
I guess. Let me just break the rule a little bit and talk about a subject as we leave here today, gun control. It emerged again, Brad. You've written enough stories about gun control in your career to fill volumes, or maybe the failure to pass gun control.
And not much has changed during my career. I mean, you still have a legislature that is basically fundamentally opposed to most gun control measures. Governor Rendell would say that's because they're in the control of that National Rifle Association. I don't know whether that's true or not. I suspect it's more that a lot of these people are reflecting views of their constituents where guns and where hunting are part of the culture, and they don't want to see any infringement on that. But it was back in full force this year. The governor went to the legislature to try to get some gun control measures enacted, including 1 gun per month. The horrendous number of murders in Philadelphia is driving this, for action statewide. But it fell on deaf ears, and I just don't see any change in that issue unless they find something to do around the edges.
Yeah, do you agree with that, Amy?
Well, I don't know about where this is going exactly, but one interesting thing, I think everybody would agree that there's been more public debate on this subject than there has in any prior year. I mean, the governor took the extraordinary step of actually addressing the House Judiciary Committee, really a major effort on his part.
Then they turned around and voted down 2 of the proposals and tabled one.
Although you saw a shift. You saw 2 Republicans actually supporting the 1 handgun a month proposal from the Philadelphia suburbs, and they say they were reflecting the will of their constituents.
John, this really does show sort of this urban-rural divide that we often talk about, where the urban areas and the suburbs are more likely to support it. You move, I guess, west of the Susquehanna and north of wherever you want to go. We won't need to go as far as Route 80, but we do have a very complicated state here, and gun control still faces a pretty tough road. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, Brad alluded to this earlier. I mean, you're really talking about a very deeply rooted, deeply entrenched tradition of hunting, of firearm ownership, and a deep
sportsmen's clubs.
And it's very difficult to convince people who are, say, west of the Susquehanna River that this is in fact a really pressing problem that needs to be addressed. They see any restriction as that camel's nose under the tent moving towards some sort of handgun ban.
Much less the so-called Second Amendment issue, which always rises. All right, look, I want to thank all of you. Have a happy New Year. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.